The conversation had been growing and growing by the week. What started as murmurs of far-right thugs had developed into a fear of a coming political party. Across the bars and meeting places all over the country, the LGBT community of Germany could feel a storm coming. Homosexuality was illegal at the start of the 20th century Germany, but was counterweighted by a healthy, thriving gay culture. Yet what was once angry grandstanding from a fringe socialist workers' party soon became national policy. In 1933, Adolf Hitler would become Chancellor of Germany and enforced a thoroughly phobic policy agenda by the day. Barely a year later, following the Night of Long Knives, the Nazi police state made Germany's homosexual population a primary target. Persecution, arrests, physical abuse, castration, and even the fate of the concentration camps lay ahead. Welcome to History on Fleek. Today we examine the unspeakable fates of gay men in Nazi Germany. When the Nazis came into power in 1933, they faced a Germany they didn't want to recognize. Across the nation they'd taken over and would change forever happened to be the birthplace of the first homosexual movement. In the late 19th century, Germany had a rare juxtaposition of a country with lax censorship laws and a flourishing writers' movement criticizing the criminality of homosexuality. From 1919, this included the first commercially sold literature purely for LGBTQ readers. On the other hand, in 1871, the German Criminal Code would add the provision of paragraph 175, outlawing homosexual acts between men. Unfortunately for the first homosexual movement, the Great Depression of 1929 would curtail the movement's momentum. Most importantly, the movement's aim of repealing paragraph 175 was lost. When the Nazis took over the country, paragraph 175 was a path to realizing their hateful ideology. From 1935, the Nazis had taken the law and revised it fully. It was the means to persecute homosexual men all across Germany. What would follow was the most vicious persecution of male homosexuals in history. The Nazis considered homosexuality as deviant behavior and the downfall of their vision of society. In the Nazi ideology, even those who thought of homosexual love were an enemy. Before their coup in the 30s, Nazi politicians tied homosexuality to their long-standing anathema, an alleged Jewish conspiracy against the German people. Starting in 1933, the Nazis would crack down on any presence of homosexuality across Germany and their occupied territories. Gay bars and clubs across Berlin, Hanover, and Cologne were forced to close, and many faced police raids. LGBTQ community members of any public visibility, from activists to prostitutes, were targeted. In the early 30s, homosexuals in smaller cities like Hamburg could still live a provincially normal life. Homosexual persecution hadn't yet become systematic, and many believed the Nazi regime would soon end. If they kept a low enough profile, they would be fine. Until 1935, the persecution under paragraph 175 was in the low hundreds, but soon after, the number of convictions would go through the roof. The Night of Long Knives is a well-known chapter in the story of the Nazis' rise to power. Its connotations are clear and echo many a violent revolution across the annals of history. The violent and urgent want to claim power, and soon enough, they start killing any in their own ranks who could possibly stand in their way. However, the Night of the Long Knives is an entirely different story from an LGBT perspective. While the clear reason for the purge was Hitler's consolidation of power and keeping the then SA in line, the consequences were considerably more layered. Ernst Röhm was a key member of the German Workers' Party and a founder of the SA. Once the Nazis claimed power, his once close relationship with Hitler would cool. The paramilitary wing of the Nazis, the SA, had become rampantly violent and growing in numbers, to the point where the German army was fearing their stature. Hitler saw a threat to his position, and on the 30th of June, 1934, Röhm, among other SA leaders, was arrested before being executed. Yet it wasn't the politics and the power that had LGBT alarm bells ringing, but the person. Quite sardonically, Ernst Röhm was a homosexual. He would declare in his own writings to be same-sex orientated. Fellow SA leader Edmund Heines suffered the same fate and was alleged to have been found in bed with another man when arrested. following a purge of any homosexuals within the Nazi command. The police state once upheld between the SS and the SA was consolidated into one. Heinrich Himmler was the man left at the helm of the operation, heading the SS, the concentration camps, and the Gestapo. He was the second most powerful man in the Nazi regime. He was also, in the eyes of many historians retrospectively, a rabid homophobe. From the Purge of Röhm onwards, the Nazi attack on homosexuality hit its dreadful stride. From 1936, the Nazi ideology on homosexuality became policy, with the German police making it a major priority. In a chilling Orwellian-type twist, what was once the Special Commission for Homosexuality became the Reich Central Office for the Combating of Homosexuality and Abortion. Rural areas would suffer less, though urban areas were major targets of the office directives for anti-homosexual policing. Just a year later, in 1937, Himmler would demand police departments across Germany make lists of any homosexuals or those suspected to be. The cold grip of civic surveillance was placed upon Germany's LGBT community. Any meeting places were watched, and any address change had to be registered. The insanity of this persecution showed its symptoms across the very mechanisms running Nazi Germany. Anti-homosexual measures were left to the courts and the police, but with no additional resources or personnel. This meant the system was somewhat clogged with this ill line of targeting. The number of cases went through the roof, but were all based on premises of private conduct, virtually impossible to prove in court. On top of this was the blind approach to identifying homosexuals. Reportedly, some police simply dragged entire classes of male youths to court and grilled them on their proclivities. Prosecutions were brought in this entirely illegal manner. The Nazi police state would arrest 95,000 men for homosexuality from 1937 to 1939. That averages about 600 arrests a week. In the same time frame, around 30,000 faced prosecution under paragraph 175. Before the Nazis, the law gave the potential of a prison sentence of months. This was now years and was a near guarantee. The Nazi ideology of addressing the plague of homosexuality would spill from the lips of judges, prosecutors, and all authorities. Yet after 1937, concentration camps were the increasing method of prosecuting homosexuals. At the beginning of 1935, around 80% of concentration camp prisoners held in protective custody were homosexual. This measure started for re-education purposes. From 1939, any homosexual who had already served a prison sentence would then be sent directly to the camps. Between 5,000 to 6,000 homosexual men were made prisoners in the concentration camps. In the hierarchy of concentration camp prisoners, homosexuals shared the lowest rung with the Jewish prisoners. Without a doubt, the homosexual Jew faced the worst possible treatment. Ultimately, survival in the camps relied on building some kind of social network among the prisoners, or being elevated in authority. Due to the extensive homophobia, homosexuals faced the most rigorous disadvantage. Along with the back-breaking labor detail and hideous conditions that they shared with the Jewish camp population, homosexuals faced their own specific abuses. SS guards would often physically abuse or outright murder homosexual prisoners for their own kicks. Mauthausen and Flossenburg had a standardized practice of working any homosexual prisoners to death. At Sachsenhausen, in the middle of 1942, the entire homosexual population of the camp was executed. During the final years of Nazi rule, human experimentation at the camps had favored test subjects, the homosexual population. Karl Vernet, the Danish doctor, would infamously experiment with testosterone pellet implants on homosexuals in hope of changing their orientation. Of those who were experimented on non-voluntarily, would a majority die afterward. Experiments on homosexuals and Jews included typhus treatment, phosphorus burns, and testing for pervitin and opiates. In some extreme cases, and this would take place out of the camps as well, under the Gestapo, some homosexuals were castrated. An estimate has up to 800 men castrated under this dire medical premise. The pink triangle was the symbol used by the Nazis to mark the clothing of gay prisoners. The pink triangle was hideous othering, a way of persecuting from afar, a labeling of humans as somehow lesser than. It has since been reclaimed by the LGBTQ+ community as a symbol of resistance and pride. Ultimately, after the Nazi regime, the discrimination against homosexuality, while considerably less murderous, did not end. Following World War II, the Allies in charge of the occupied territories would continue enforcing paragraph 175. This would mean that gay men could still face persecution and prosecution. The wheels of progress moved slowly, and it wouldn't be until 1968 and 1969 that both East and West Germany would decriminalize the identity. Any reference to Nazi persecution of homosexuals wouldn't arise till the 1970s, following the Stonewall riots. From there, a fervent LGBT rights movement would begin. In 1985, Richard von Weizsäcker, a president of West Germany, would be the first to officially recognize the Nazi regime's actions. In 2002, Nazi-era judgments through paragraph 175 was annulled, and finally, as recently as 2017, victims were offered compensation. Little by little, the wheels of progress move, and one spill of daylight at a time, the darkest of the past can be drawn into light, and maybe, just maybe, the whole world gets a little brighter. This is History on Fleek, and we'll see you next time.